Gamers always believe that an epic win is possible, and that it's always worth trying, and trying now. Jane McGonigal.
You're listening to Writing Roots, brought to you by Aspen House Publishing.
Welcome to Writing Roots. I'm Lee Hull.
And I'm Lee Esses. And we are very excited to have Rick Gualtieri with us today. He is one of the hosts of Authors and Dragons podcast. Welcome.
Thanks for having me on.
So, can you first introduce a little bit about yourself and the podcast? How did it come about? How long has it been running?
All right. So, Authors and Dragons will actually be coming up on our 10th year in 2025.
Wow.
So, we've been running for about 9 years now. And really, it started one of the founding members, Robert Bevan, who writes the Caverns and Creatures series. He was talking to Drew Hayes, who writes the Superpowered series. And the idea was, we all write fantasy. We all are gamers at heart. Why don't we do a podcast in which we play a game and have fun with it? And that's pretty much the origin. So it really started with them reaching out to authors they know. And as they recruited us, we reached out to other authors we knew. And, well, that's pretty much how the podcast started.
Very cool. And were you included since the beginning, or did you hop on board at some point?
Nope, I've been there since the beginning.
What is the basic premise of each episode?
We typically have two types of episodes. We have our main game, which is usually 5 or 6 fantasy authors, all of us are authors, playing a game of D&D, mostly pretty badly. And then every other week we do what are called side quest. And side quest is our whatever we want to fill it with episodes. So sometimes we do interviews, sometimes we play games, sometimes we just pick a topic and just rant about it for an hour. So side quest is pretty much anything goes.
That is amazing. I'm sure a lot of our listeners, if they aren't already listening, that is going to be right up their alley.
Well, I'll just warn your listeners, it's an adult podcast. It is definitely R-rated. We don't hold back with the language. That said, it's really all of us just having fun.
It definitely sounds like a lot of fun. Makes me wish I'd thought of the same concept a decade ago. So you mentioned a couple of the other names that are involved. Do you have any favorite moments or an anecdote of your favorite time on the air? Something that gives us an idea of the vibe of what we could expect?
All right. So my original character was an overzealous paladin named Silas Kane, and Robert Bevan was playing a thief named Klaus. And our two characters didn't like each other. Now, first of all, it started a rumor amongst our listeners that we didn't like each other for real, which, of course, we ran with.
Of course.
One of my favorite episodes of the game, I was putting my kids to bed, so I had to step away from the game for a few minutes. I came back, there was a battle going on, and Klaus was in trouble. And I had a chance to save him, but I had just gotten back from, like I said, putting my kids to bed, so I wasn't paying attention. So I didn't save him.
Oh.
So Klaus dies, and as he's ascending to heaven, or to wherever his gods are, Drew, who was the DM, paused for a second, and Bob was like, oh, what's going to happen now? Am I going to be stuck in Silas's body? And Drew pauses, and he's like, you are now. So Klaus's soul wound up in my body, so it was about a year of the podcast. We were just fighting over control for the same body.
That sounds fantastic.
That is such beautiful storytelling. And working on that improv in the moment and going with something that can really, I love it so much.
A lot of it is improv in the moment because we all are accomplished writers. So that's kind of what we do. I mean, there obviously are like scripted parts. And there's an adventure that we are following. But most of the humor comes because somebody will get caught on something and the rest of us will just run with it.
It's always fun when you can accidentally give the DM an idea and it's like, well, yeah, that's happening now.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
And really, this entire month, we've been covering TTRPGs and writing and how they work together so well. And that's a lot of why we wanted Authors and Dragons to join us today, because you guys have that experience. You guys are authors, and you can pull from both to inform both and all of that experience. In general, in your group, what is the writing style? Are you guys pantsers? Are you guys plotters? Is there a mix of some among you?
I would say it's a mix. I'm relatively sure that Drew is a plotter. I think Bob might be a pantser. I kind of do both. John Hartness, I think, does both. So I'd say it's a mix because amongst all of us, I mean, you're talking a lot of books. I'd say there's probably well over 100 books published between all of us.
Wow. So if our listeners wanted to lean in and find you, figure out what it is that makes your podcast work, where could they find the podcast?
Well, the good thing is we just started a new game. So if somebody doesn't want to wade through 9 years of history, we started a new game called Dicey Bastards. So you can find us at our website, authorsanddragons.com, or pretty much on any podcast platform. I believe we publish the new game under both Authors and Dragons and under Dicey Bastards.
Cool. So let's get into you as an author and the influence that TTRPG has in that space. Can you start off with what kind of books do you write?
All right, so I'm a multi-genre author. I write primarily horror, comedy, and fantasy.
It's a combination.
Yep.
And they're all for adults and all pretty much the same group of people, or is it different books for different types of people?
I'd say different books for different types of people. The people who like my comedies don't always like my horror, and vice versa. I would say 99% of my books are made for adults. I have one that's kind of borderline YA, but for the most part, yeah, I'm writing for adults who aren't afraid of violence, gore, language, things like that.
Woohoo! I'm with you there.
Any book in particularly that you want to shamelessly plug?
One of my favorites is from a series called High Moon. And the book one of that series is called The Girl Who Punches Werewolves.
Nice.
I love that title.
I won't lie. I do too.
So what about your influences as a reader? Are there particular books that you go to time and again? Are there authors that every time they say, I've got a new book coming out, you're automatically pre-ordering it?
So I'm a big Stephen King fan, both his new and his old stuff. I love pretty much anything that Douglas Preston and Lincoln Child write. As for the rest, I usually read in trends as opposed to like following specific authors. Like right now, I'm reading a lot of cryptid horror books. So that's what I'm looking for. I'm not necessarily looking for authors. I'm looking for books that fit my mood at the time.
Okay.
Now for the gaming aspect of things. How long have you been playing TTRPGs?
Since probably before high school. And I'm not going to tell you how many years that is because that is seriously going to date me. But I've been a gamer for a long time.
And were you a gamer or an author first?
Oh, definitely a gamer.
So when you started writing, did the gaming influence your writing?
To a degree, I'd say it did. One of my other series, The Tome of Bill, it's horror comedy. The main character in it, especially in book one, Bill the Vampire, the main character, he's a programmer, he's also a gamer. And a lot of the anecdotes he tells in the story with regards to, okay, this happened to him in a game, are really just pulled from my own experiences gaming.
Nice.
And would you say at all that improv, that collaborative storytelling, how has that helped benefit your writing process?
Well, it helps because about half of my books are pantsed. Some of my books I do like to plot because of reasons, but when I am pantsing a book, just the ability to think on my feet, to sit down and not know where I'm going, but still end the day with a couple thousand words of writing, that plays into it. Because essentially I'm thinking on my feet as I write.
And is all of your gaming TTRPG, or are you also a PC gamer or Xbox or whatever else?
I play PC games, more of a PlayStation person than an Xbox guy. But yeah, I like video games.
Cool.
Same.
We're liking the new Baldur's Gate.
Oh, that's devoured my life for the last year.
Yeah, they did some nice work on that.
Yeah. So, speaking to authors, what advice do you have for them when it comes to developing character backstory? Because I'm sure we all know character backstory is kind of a key piece in getting a campaign started and weaving it throughout the whole campaign. So what sort of advice do you have around character creation?
So the advice I give is probably different than the advice I follow. When I introduce a new character, usually that character has a specific hook, specific reason they're there. And usually I discover their backstory as I'm writing. That said, I usually recommend people sit down and flesh that out ahead of time. Ask, what does this character want? What do they like? What do they dislike? You want to get kind of a positive and negative from them. What will keep them from making it to their goal? Just basic questions to start to flesh them out. But again, I don't follow my own advice. Typically, I will start with a character idea, pretty simple in my head, and I will develop them as I write. It's like their life will come to me as I'm in the words.
Okay. So when you're gaming, do you try to integrate the story immediately, or do you wait for the DM to introduce opportunities, or does it depend on the character?
It really does depend on the character. And also the campaign. I'm playing in a campaign right now where we really don't have backstories. We're trying to figure out who we are as the story progresses. But other times I've come in with a full fleshed out bio for a character, and that's what I run with.
So do you have a favorite character that you've written, and why are they your favorite?
So I would say the character of Gansetseg, Gan for short, in the Toma Bill series. She's probably my favorite because she's a 300-year-old vampire. She's the adopted daughter of Ogadai Khan, who's the son of Genghis Khan. And everything with her is a combination of cold and calculating, but also id. This is somebody who's used to being royalties, who's pretty much never been told no in her life, but is highly educated, highly calculating, and has absolutely no regard whatsoever for human life.
Is she an antagonist in the story, or is she a mentor character?
She exists as both. She'll pop in and out as an ally, but almost always whatever she's doing, it's kind of like in a Doctor Doom sort of way. She's always doing things that benefit her the most. And it's just sometimes that what benefits her also benefits the other characters.
That's fair. What about a favorite character that you've played in D&D? Not necessarily on the podcast, although if it's one we can find there, that would also be cool.
So in the first game of the podcast, my main character is Silas Kane. And Silas Kane, originally, the concept of him was born from pretty much one line in 4th edition D&D, in which they were talking about alignment, and they said, lawful good is technically whatever you think is lawful good. So I basically designed this paladin who's just a complete psycho-religious zealot. Pretty much everything he does is for the glory of his god, even if it causes chaos and misery and destruction. And he is just unwavering in his belief. Even when presented by an avatar of his god who pretty much said, okay, you need to knock it off, he was just like, obviously this is a test.
That's gorgeous.
Has there been any overlap between your written characters and the characters that you meet and interact with or play in TTRPGs? Have you taken influence for either one, either way?
Occasionally. In my Toma Bill series, we'll usually talk about past characters. And some of those are past characters that I've done, but some of them are ones where I just make up on the spot. And one of those characters that was in the book, he talked about playing this alchemist named Professor Blastingus, aka Professor Blasting Us. And I needed a new character for a real-life game, and I was like, this is a great name. I should play this character. And he turned out to be such a fun character to play, at least until the party turned on me, and, things went bad.
With a name like that, I imagine he had it coming.
Oh, he 100% did.
You mentioned this animosity that your paladin had with the rogue, and how you leaned into how the fans thought you actually hated each other as players. How is it that you develop that kind of relationship between characters and between other players, where it comes across in this story without actually wanting to murder people?
Well, it's really just having a healthy sense of this is make-believe, we're just having fun. Because here's the thing, his rogue was just vile and immoral, and my paladin just thought he was scum, and of course he didn't like my paladin. So we played off of that, but at the same time we're having a lot of fun. Even though these two characters hate each other, we're spending a good chunk of the game laughing because it's just so absurdly hilarious. So it's really not too difficult to do that. Just got to compartmentalize a little bit.
And I imagine the players on the other side have to, you have to know them well enough. I once had a paladin character that I was playing against, and he liked to take his time before doing anything. So my character I designed to just jump in feet first, just mostly to annoy the player. But it was somebody that I knew well enough that I could needle him that way.
Yeah, not in the podcast, but in real life games, I've occasionally run into that. I was playing a Kingmaker campaign one time, and my character was pretty much doing his own thing. And one of the other players got really annoyed, and he was like, we're trying to build up this thing. We're trying to have this epic campaign, and you're ruining it. And I was just like, dude, I'm just here to have fun.
Yes.
I also got, somebody to point it out, I was like, what are we building here? We're building a house of Legos, and the second the campaign is done, that house of Legos gets knocked over.
That's a great way to approach it, I think.
I mean, generally speaking, I've gone through a lot of characters and stuff. I respect and I understand why some players get very attached to their characters, because they put a lot of work into it. In my mind, both because I played D&D for so long and also because in my books, well, characters tend to die early and often. I don't really get attached. So if I'm playing a game and my character, like, something happens, I'll just make a new one. It's not a big deal.
We all know that a lot of TTRPGs, a lot of campaigns, there are a ton of side quests, a ton of things in the middle of the plot that we are following these random trails before we ever get to the main conclusion. This is how campaigns last for a long time, aside from, scheduling issues. So to me, I found as a DM, working with my players and their random tangents because I said one wrong line and they decided to hold on to that has really helped me in my writing figure out the middle of the books, because that is the hardest part of the book to write, where it's kind of fun and games, but you still have to go somewhere with it. So have you found at all that that middle part is easier because you do have so much experience with gaming?
No. So I usually find the middle part of a book to be easy for no other reason than the path ahead of me is wide open. I can literally do anything as long as I keep the end state in mind. So I actually really enjoy the middle of a book because it really gives my imagination a chance to run wild. It's beginnings and endings that are a little more difficult for me, or I have to put more work in.
Oh, that sounds so nice. Because the beginning and end, that's what I can write. The middle bits.
Well, see, that's also where pantsing comes in handy, because I can open up a chapter and decide, okay, these characters are just going to decide to do something completely random that has nothing to do with their main plot. And as long as I just keep the main plot in mind and don't send them too far off where they can't get back, those have been some of my best scenes.
From an outside perspective, knowing a little bit of your history there with the gaming and what came first, that is such a TTRPG collaborative storytelling mindset there, where, yes, we are going to keep in mind that we have to go take down this big bad evil guy, but in the meantime, we need to do other things first. We need to level up. We need to improve our skills before we even have the power to take that on. And I can't say for sure because I'm not you, but I feel like that probably had even some subconscious influence in that ability for you to be like, yeah, let's just have fun in the middle because we're not ready yet for that ending.
I can't necessarily deny that. Probably is true, but yeah, a lot of that really does come down to that sense of having fun. And I was going to say, ultimately, I am a firm believer, like, I do not release a book unless I am happy with it, I enjoy it. Because even if I'm writing to an audience of one, that's one person I know likes the book, and now I just have to find other people with my tastes. So, yeah, it just feels natural to me to make it fun, even when I'm writing horror.
So do you have a particular moment that comes to mind about this middle of this story where the characters go off on a tangent and just have a blast because they're enjoying their adventures?
Now, let me just put out, I didn't say the characters were having a blast. I said I was having a blast. Usually me having a blast involves my characters having the opposite.
Yay! Torture the characters.
Yeah, so for example, in this one book, The Morning Woods, which is book 3 of the Tome of Bill, they had to head up to Canada. They're in this old Jeep Wagoneer. And so they stop on the side of the road. It's like all wilderness and stuff. And the main character needs to get out and take a pee break. And I was like, he needs to be attacked. And I was like, what's going to attack him? I was like, a bear? No. So he ends up getting trampled by this moose. And it's just such a great scene because he's just like, I'm a vampire. This should not be happening. But this moose is kicking the crap out of me.
Because it's a moose. What else are you going to do?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I would venture to say in Canada, they're far more dangerous than bears.
Yeah. But the moose just wound up being hilarious for me in this scene. And again, not fun for the character.
So one of the things that we've talked about on the podcast is the value of items for your characters for telling the story. You give the players something at the beginning that they hold on to the entire time so they can use it against the bad guy at the end. Or they completely forget about it and then it actually ends up giving a side quest later, that kind of thing. Are there any stories that you have where an item in either your game or your books has come in clutch at the end of the story?
I have had a few items that have done the exact opposite.
Yes!
Where it's basically just a setup for a fake out or a cursed item or so. In fact, one of my more recent books had a pretty big one. I don't want to give spoilers, but basically this epic item that he got just winds up ruining the main character's life.
Nice.
But yeah, I do have a few items that pop up here and there in my books. In Tome of Bill, for example, one of the items is a sword that was owned by Joan of Arc. As the legend goes, Joan of Arc heard voices that directed her to dig up and find this sword. So essentially, this sword has been passed down from generation to generation of vampire-slaying heroes, which Joan of Arc was one. And as a result, it has this great history, which of course makes it kind of tragic because then it winds up in the hands of this dumbass who just wants to sell it. Because he's like, but think of how much a museum will give me for this. And it's like, dude, that's one of the greatest artifacts for destroying vampires.
Nice.
So you said earlier that you sometimes struggle with the endings of books and figuring out when to do that, how to do that. So what about in campaigns? How do you feel about ending campaigns and deciding that this is where we're going to finish this?
Well, some campaigns have a natural endpoint, especially if you're doing, say, a pre-written module. In other campaigns, sometimes you just reach a point of fatigue where almost it's kind of like an agreement between the DM and players that, okay, it's time to bring this to a close. I guess it's really just about developing a feel for it, engaging your players, and having your players communicate. But it's also knowing your own personal level of fatigue when it comes to DMing.
Does this change how you write the beginnings of your books? If you anticipate a big ending clash against the BBEG, or if it's a, don't know, let's see what happens?
No, I don't think it really influences my beginnings. I usually have a set idea of how I want to start. And a lot of my series books, what I like to do is, you're familiar with James Bond and Indiana Jones. So those movies, they all start with a little mini adventure. You know, something where like, okay, Indiana Jones is trying to steal some artifact. He gets captured. He manages to beat the bad guys and he flies off or so. And maybe lasts about 10 or 15 minutes. And then the main plot starts. I love doing that because it allows me to throw people right into the action, get a sense of what the characters are up to, get some internal dialogue, but also have some action going on. And then at the end of that little mini adventure, that's where we slow down and get more character driven.
That makes sense.
Yeah, so I'm a fan of starting off books in that sense because it captures people right away, because some people do not like when a book starts slow. And then you can slow it down afterwards. And at that point, hopefully they're hooked enough to keep reading.
Let's talk about world building. We know that within TTRPGs, if you use a certain system, if you set it in a certain world, if you use the official material, you have a lot of world building available to you. But most people also venture off and do a little bit of homebrew in with it. So how often do you as players get to do your own world building, add a little bit of your own flavor to the whole campaign?
So as players, I'd say, especially in the current game we're playing, I'd say there's a decent amount of that. The DM is author M.K. Gibson, by the way. He's taking into account our pasts, what our characters do, even minor things that we do that come back to haunt us. So he's allowing us to build this world inside of this overarching adventure we're playing in.
Do you guys flush that out before the campaign even begins, or do you just kind of give your backstory and then take the less is more approach and discover it along the way?
I'd say the latter. I have a very small bio for the character I'm playing now, Moog Face Eater. And I sent that to him along with some notes. But for the most part, it's figuring it out as we go. One of the hallmarks of this character that I've been trying to play up is he loves to tell stories of when he was a kid, growing up in this hyper-violent orc tribe, and all the horrific things they would do that he just finds commonplace.
I love that.
So do you have any advice that you would give to authors, especially if they are interested in dipping their toes into the TTRPG world to help influence and improve their writing?
TTRPG is all about storytelling. I mean, yes, there's action, there's adventure, there's fighting and stuff, but it really boils down to storytelling. So I would say pay attention to that, especially if you have a good DM. And if you are the DM, think about those things as you switch over to writing. Because writing a campaign and writing a book, they're pretty similar, except the difference is in the case of a book, you're not only writing the world, but you're effectively the party yourself as well.
What about for authors that don't necessarily write fantasy or fantasy-related genres?
I think good storytelling is good storytelling regardless of genre. I mean, obviously tropes differ, expectations differ, but the hero's journey can be translated to really any genre. So I'm not really sure it matters. Now, mind you, if they don't like fantasy, I'm not sure why they're playing most RPGs, but...
Yeah.
Yeah, I would say if they don't like fantasy, there's a lot of sci-fi ones out there if they're more interested in that, or there's really an RPG out there for almost anything, almost any genre. You just have to look hard enough and hope you can find a good player base.
Yes, good player, good GM. And I mean, there's some RPGs out there that are designed to be learned in less than an afternoon and really just sat down and you just go with it.
I kind of want my next TTRPG character that I play to be in the wrong genre. So everyone else is like, oh, it's this epic hero thing. He's like, no, I'm pretty sure this is a rom-com.
Well, see, that's where playing in a sci-fi campaign, because then you can play around with time travel, alternate dimensions.
Nice.
I think you can have a lot of fun with.
Yeah, I know Lee and I played Starfinder, and I was a witch warper. So all of my stuff was magic, reality bending stuff. And she was something science-based. And so anytime I did magic, she would dismiss it and be like, there's a scientific explanation. I just have to figure it out.
I played a Call of Cthulhu game like that where I played a skeptic.
Nice.
Yeah, some of those can be fun. Years back, I was in a campaign. It was a D&D campaign where we were brought into a modern world. And in order to get back, we needed to collect spell components. And it turned out those spell components were effectively the ingredients to make meth. So we had to go through all this underworld and convince people that, no, we're not drug dealers. We're just trying to do magic, which, of course, wasn't really convincing anybody.
As someone who does both writing and tabletop gaming quite frequently, do you find that it uses the same energy bar in your soul, or does doing one fill the energy for the other?
I'd call them different energy bars completely. When I'm writing, it's writing. When I'm editing, it's editing. And when I'm playing a game, it's a completely different experience for me. I recently just started a non-podcast game after taking about a year off because I was just exhausted with playing for a bit and I just needed some time off. But at the same time, I was continuing to write during that without any problem. So it's really just a completely different experience for me.
Do you have any final thoughts to share with our listeners? Any advice either for gaming or for writing?
I'd say in both cases, always strive to have fun, because if you're not having fun, there's a point where you almost have to ask yourself, why am I doing this? That's what I try to do. When I game, I have fun. I do try to take into account and not always annoy the other players, but that's not always possible. Ultimately, I'm there to have fun, but also ultimately when I'm writing, I'm also there to have fun because that ultimately keeps my energy up.
Do you want to give us one last reminder of where we can find your books?
Definitely. My name is Rick Gualtieri. You can find me at rickgualtieri.com. If you can't spell that, the easiest way to find me on Google or on Amazon is just to search for Bill the Vampire. That will bring you to me, my website, or my stuff on Amazon without having to spell Gualtieri, which if I could go back and do it again, I would just pick an easy-to-spell pen name.
Yeah, that's what I ended up doing for my last name as well, because my legal last name is too easily mixed up, and there are a lot of associations with that word that I just don't need to deal with.
I can understand. I mean, there's a good and bad. I mean, the bad, obviously, is pronunciation, spelling. The good is I absolutely own my name when it comes to SEO, search engine optimization.
Yes.
I do not have to fight with anybody.
That is very nice. We will also be putting links to your website and to the podcast, to your books, on the landing page of this episode.
Cool.
But I think you put it really succinctly earlier when you said that the most important thing in both playing and writing is having fun. Because if you're not doing that, why are you doing any of it?
Yeah. If that was the case, I could get an office job, be miserable in there, but probably get better benefits.
So we would love to remind our listeners out there that the best way to tell your stories and enjoy your stories is to
write and play selfishly.
If you have a question or comment for our hosts or a topic you'd like us to cover, send us an email at writingroots@aspenhousepublishing.com or find us on Facebook by searching for Aspen House Publishing.